the book Bel Canto, and thank you so much for coming.
Sure. Thank you so much, Mary, for having us. I really appreciate you inviting us to be with you, and everyone who has taken time out of their evening to come spend the evening with us. Just thank you so much. We really appreciate it. My name is Andrea Scobie, and I am the Director of Education with Michigan Opera Theater.
And I'm Arthur White, Director of External Affairs with Michigan Opera Theater. What a thrill it is to be here. You know, just a year ago, we would normally be spending 90% of our time out in the community, sharing the beauty, magic, and wonder of opera. Of course, that things have changed in the last year with this pandemic. And so we are just thrilled that we can join you virtually, and we'll continue to do the same. So we're excited to be here to talk about Bel Canto.
Exactly. This evening allows me to talk about two of my great loves, which are the opera, of course, but also reading. I'm a big reader. I loved Bel Canto when I first read it years ago. And, MOT, we partner with a number of libraries pretty regularly because so much of opera is based in great literature. And so this year, when we had to kind of take this pause from our traditional programming, we were really thinking, how can we still engage with our library partners? How can we still continue to have these amazing conversations about opera and literature? And Ann Patchett's Bel Canto is a book that lets us do just that. So Arthur is going to go ahead and share his screen in just a minute. Our presentation, just to give you all a sense of the evening, will run about 40 or 45 minutes long. And then after that, we're going to go ahead and take questions, as Mary said. So feel free, if something pops into your mind, to go ahead and pop that in the chat while you're thinking of it. But just know that we'll have time at the end all together to answer those questions. So Arthur, go ahead and share away. Great. So we are this evening, of course, talking about the music of Bel Canto. And I want to start by talking a little bit about the author, Ann Patchett. So go ahead and move us forward a little bit, Arthur. There we go. So there's our author. Ann Patchett is the author of 7 novels, including The Magician's Assistant, State of Wonder, Commonwealth, and of course, the reason we're here tonight, Bel Canto. She was the editor of Best American Short Stories of 2006. She's written 3 books of nonfiction, and in 2019, she published her first children's book. So quite a prolific and wide-ranging author. Now, Bel Canto was published in 2001, and it was inspired by a real-life hostage situation, which we'll get into shortly. But first, I just want to let you know a little bit about the background of the book. At the time of writing, Patchett made the decision that in her story, the captors would release all of the women except one, and this person would have been the most important woman at the party. And so Patchett asked herself, why is this one character so important? And she decided that it was because that she was the entertainment for the evening, and she was someone who was famous in her own right. Now, Patchett considered making this character a pianist or a violinist before she finally settled on making her a singer. And more specifically, she decided to make this leading character an opera singer because she felt that that choice would be, in her own words, the most international, which I think is fitting for the story that we're about to dive into. So with that decision made, with a direction for the plot, Patchett realized one thing, and that is that she knew absolutely nothing about opera. She had never seen an opera. She had never even listened to one all the way through. And so she really wanted to remedy that. And she went out and bought a recording of Puccini's Madama Butterfly. She shared in one interview that she picked the album with the prettiest cover. I think that we can all relate to that. I've been there with books or albums who judges by their cover. Ann Patchett certainly did. But when she sat down to listen and started to engage with the music, she felt like she was unprepared even to listen. She felt like she needed a full-on opera education. And so she wound up finding a book called Opera 101 by Fred Plotkin, which she has called the book that changed my life. And it was this book, Opera 101, that she read that prepared her to listen to opera, to attend performances, and most importantly, write this book in which opera propels, supports, and really reflects the plot in myriad ways. Patchett says over the years, she's probably sold as many copies of Opera 101 just through talking about it that she has sold of Bel Canto. But certainly Bel Canto has not struggled to gain notice. It was a finalist for the National Book Critics Circle Award. It won both the Orange Prize for Fiction and the Penn Faulkner Award for Fiction. And it was placed on several top book lists, including Amazon's Best Books of the Year. So this, as I mentioned, was based, Bel Canto was inspired by a true story. And go ahead and take us forward in our slides, Arthur. It was based on the Japanese embassy hostage crisis, which began on the 17th of December, 1996 in Lima, Peru. And this was an incident when 14 members of the Tupac Amaru revolutionary movement, called the MRTA, after its Spanish language translation, took hostage hundreds of high-level diplomats, government and military officials, and business executives who were attending a party at the official residence of the Japanese ambassador to Peru. Now, the MRTA was dedicated to the overthrow of the Peruvian government, and they were seeking the release of political prisoners. And in this pursuit, they blew a hole through the wall of the Japanese ambassador's residence, and they took hostage more than 700 of these high-level diplomats, government and military officials, as I've said, business executives, and their friends and families. And now, while most of these hostages were released, 72 of them were held for 126 days. This is a situation that went on for 4 months. The guerrillas had demanded to speak with the Peruvian president, who of course did not appear. And according to hostages, the rebel leaders tried to win over his captives. He was not violent with them, but he engaged them in philosophical conversations about the plight of the poor in Peru. And so over the course of these 4 months, some of the captors and their hostages began to form bonds. Definitely not all, but some. For instance, I've read that there was one report that noted that there was a conservative agricultural minister who found himself inspired by talks with one of the young revolutionaries, and together they began to sketch out a plan to help the poorer, more rural regions grow coffee. One government minister began to teach a young rebel how to draw. So they were certainly forming these bonds. Ann Patchett has said about this story, there are so many elements that were compelling to me: confinement, survival, and the construction of a makeshift family. Now, Patchett's account, as I've said, was only inspired by the events of the crisis in Peru, but in learning more about the overlap of these events, it's incredibly interesting to see where fact and fiction overlap. And there's some specific fact and fiction overlap in the personalities of some of the characters and in their real life counterparts and inspirations, particularly the character of our lead, Roxanne Koss. And Arthur is about to tell us a little bit more.
Indeed. Okay, so the real life Roxanne Koss is based basically on the character of Carol Bennett, or the person Carol Bennett. She's an American soprano known for having a beautiful and creamy, rich voice. She has distinguished herself in lieder, oratorio, opera, and in new music. But she's also an educator. She teaches at Boston University, as well as Rice University in Houston, Texas. So Anne was acquainted with Carol, so she based the character of this singer around her. But as Andrea mentioned, Anne knew nothing about opera. And so she began to listen to recordings, and she began to base the vocal idea of who Roxanne Koss was after American soprano Renee Fleming, one of the biggest names in all of the opera world. She hails from Indiana, Pennsylvania. Let's see if I think I have a picture of her. Oh, there she is. Hails from Indiana, Pennsylvania, born on Valentine's Day in 1959. And much like Maria Callas, she's distinguished herself in the lyric roles, the coloratura roles, as well as the dramatic and spinto roles. Now, in the book, Hosokawa requests that Roxanne sing her signature aria. This is the Song to the Moon. Now, this is from the opera Rusalka by composer Dvorak. This premiered opera back in 1901. Now, Rusalka is a water gnome. She's the ruler of the lake. Now, she has fallen in love with a human prince who hunts around her lake. And so in this aria, she asks the moon to tell this prince of her love. Now, Rusalka is frustrated at the barrier of not being human. She's unable to realize this love. And much like the language barrier between Hosokawa and Roxanne proves problematic, but of course it is not impossible. Here is Renee Fleming in the Song to the Moon, which was the number that was being sung at the time the rebels burst in to this party. The ravishing aria Song to the Moon, sung beautifully by Renee Fleming, in a performance, by the way, at the Metropolitan Opera House.
I don't ever get sick of hearing that aria. It's just so beautiful. I can see why Mr. Hosokawa would have chosen that specifically to be sung at the event that evening. So one of the most important musical moments that we see in the novel Bel Canto comes about halfway through. And that's when Roxanne sings O mio babbino caro from Puccini's Gianni Schicchi. We'll talk about that moment specifically in just a second, but first I want to talk about Gianni Schicchi. You may already know of the opera's composer Puccini. He's considered one of the most important Italian opera composers after Giuseppe Verdi. His place in operatic history is cemented by his big three, that is La Boheme, Tosca, and Madama Butterfly, which are three of the most frequently produced and performed operas in the world today. And it was this trifecta of operas that established him as such an important voice in the 19th century romantic Italian opera style. He was a composer who really helped to carry opera into the modern era with his contribution to the realistic, or what we would call verismo style of opera. Now his opera Gianni Schicchi was originally part of a trio of one-act operas that he composed. Together they went under the title of Il Trittico, but it really was three separate pieces, which were known as Il Tabarro, Suor Angelica, and the piece we're discussing tonight, Gianni Schicchi, which was the most successful of the three at the time of its premiere. Now Gianni Schicchi is a comedy, a little bit unusual for an opera. We're often accustomed to the melodrama of opera, but Puccini gives us something funny and comical in Gianni Schicchi. It centers around its crafting and cunning title character, who was a historical figure mentioned by Dante in the Divine Comedy. The action of the opera opens in Florence at the home of the wealthy Buoso Donati, who has just died, and his family, including cousins, nephews, and in-laws, gather around ostensibly to mourn his passing, but really they're more preoccupied by the fact that old Buoso has left his riches not to any of them, but to the church, and they are determined to find a way around this will. And it's Buoso's nephew Ranuccio who suggests that the one person who might help them to get around the will, whether it's legally or illegally, is a man named Gianni Schicchi. And Ranuccio is advocating for Skiki because he is in love with Skiki's daughter Lauretta. The two want to get married, but both families are dead set against the match. Eventually in the opera, Skiki devises a plan to dictate a new will, which involves fooling the notary through various skullduggery and hijinks, including lies, including impersonation of a dead man. And the family are all scheming in their own ways to come out with the lion's share from Buoso's will, but it's Skiki himself who eventually winds up on top. So if it sounds a little bit like the more recent film Knives Out, that's because there are many similarities. So as I mentioned, it's a comedy, but there is one moment of great drama in this opera, and it's a moment that Ann Patchett really mirrors to great effect. So in the opera, you have this young woman, Lauretta. She's not allowed to marry her love, Ranuccio, and in a moment of desperation, she pleads with her father to allow the match in her aria, O mio babbino caro. And it's this aria that Roxanne sings when she herself is in a moment of great desperation. In order to keep her voice in shape, she needs to begin singing again. And she's overjoyed in the novel to find miraculously the perfect accompanist among her fellow captives. But what she does not have is sheet music. And the rebel guards are not allowing any packages in. They tell her she cannot have access to the package of music which has been sent for her. And she pleads with her captors, feeling, as Lauretta does, a sense of great need. Now, this aria is a beautiful one. It's full of longing, but it's also somewhat manipulative on Lauretta's part. She tells her father that if she cannot marry Ranuccio, that she will commit suicide by leaping from the Ponte Vecchio, that famous bridge in Italy. And Roxanne also uses this music to ensure that she gets what she wants by issuing an ultimatum. In singing the aria, she brings everyone who hears it to tears, and then she immediately says that unless she gets her music, they will never hear her sing another note. And much like Skiki in the opera, her captors are powerless against this emotion, and they soon give in to that request. So we have the chance to hear that music tonight. Here is O mio babino caro.
It's probably no surprise that after that ravishing singing, of course, he gives in and allows her to marry Ranuccio. No surprise there. You can't say no after that ravishing aria.
Absolutely not. And they couldn't say no to Roxanne in the book either. How could you?
Indeed, indeed. Should we continue on then?
Yes.
Did I lose? Did I lose my partner here?
No,
Okay.
no, I think I went mute for a minute, but yes, let's move
Okay,
on.
no problem. Now, the title of the book, of course, Bel Canto, we know is Italian, but literally translated, it means beautiful singing. And it also represents a specific time period in the early 19th century, a style of opera writing during that period. These are composers you may have heard of: Rossini, who gave us Barber of Seville, Bellini, and Donizetti. And so if you were going to sing any of the composers of this particular period, you had to possess vocal virtuosity. You had to be able to sing high. You had to be able to sing low. You had to be able to sing fast notes. You had to be able to trill. You had to be able to spin a long, beautiful line in one breath. So you basically needed to be a vocal Olympian to sing any of the music coming out of the Bel Canto era. Now, also during this time, dramaticism started to become more and more important in opera. And so something that was born during this period was something called the mad scene. The mad scene is an enactment of insanity upon the stage. And so we're going to look at a particular mad scene, probably one of the most famous mad scenes from the opera Lucia di Lammermoor by Donizetti, as we said, premiered back in 1835. Now, Lucia, our heroine, has been tricked into marrying a man by the name of Arturo. Now, her family wants her to marry Arturo because Arturo and his family are very wealthy. But Lucia doesn't love Arturo. She loves Edgardo, who doesn't have any money. And when Edgardo leaves off out of town for some business, the family sort of tricks her into thinking that he has found another love elsewhere and is not going to return to Lucia. And so Lucia ends up marrying Arturo reluctantly, but she had no other choice, no other prospects. And of course, in true operatic fashion, she has just signed the wedding contract with her name. She is now married when who shows up? Edgardo, and she realizes she has been tricked. Now, this trick makes her suffer basically a complete mental collapse. And on her wedding night, she ends up murdering her husband, Arturo, in their wedding bed. And she wanders out in her white nightgown, covered in his blood, into the wedding reception, which is still going on, of course, to the horror of all of the guests. So listen to this aria as you listen to the vocal gymnastics, which help us reveal sort of the mental break that she has had with reality. And so I would also mention in the book, Hosokawa has fallen in love with the voice of Roxanne after hearing a recording of her singing the mad scene. So here's the mad scene from Lucia di Lammermoor. There is the famous mad scene from Donizetti's Lucia di Lammermoor, the first time that Mr. Hosokawa has fallen in love with the voice of Roxanne.
And what a moment to make fall in love. That is some exceptional singing. And that was Lizette Oropesa right there. I don't know. I don't hear if you mentioned that, Arthur, but
I did. Thank you for saying that. But go on. I was going to say she debuted, bowed at Michigan Opera Theater just a few years ago in Julius Caesar. I was going to say, I couldn't remember which opera, Julius Caesar by Handel. She's gone on to make quite a big name. She's probably one of the number one or number two Lucias in the world today on the operatic stage. So we were very fortunate to have had her come through Michigan Opera Theater.
Absolutely. So as we move on through Patchett's novel, of course, we've been exploring the music primarily through the lens of our two main characters, who are Roxanne and Mr. Hosokawa. The opera connects to other characters in the story, as we shall soon see. So prior to the events of the novel, opera has touched the life of one of our minor characters, and that is the young priest, Father Arguedas. Now, in the book, Father Arguedas, he is 26 years old. He is described as a third-tier parish priest whose responsibilities are only to light candles and serve communion, but he has this great and deep love of opera, and he spends his free hours in the basement of a university library listening to old recordings. Now, his love of opera is so great that during seminary, he thought that he should give it up. He was fearful that such great love must be a sin. However, an older priest counsels him that art is not a sin, and Father Arguedas comes over time to see opera as an expression of praise. And I really love these sections of the novel. I love the way that Patchett talks about that connection, that music is an expression of praise, is a reflection of the divine. For those of us who love music in many, many forms, maybe we've had that experience as well. But Father Arguedas has one gray area in his mind. He mostly accepts that this is true, but he's not sure about the Opera Carmen. He loves it, but he can't be entirely sure it's not sinful. The Opera Carmen is based on a novella of the same name by the French author Prosper Mérimée. It was published in 1845, and the opera's music was composed by Georges Bizet. And his work on Carmen began in 1872 when the Parisian Opera Comique invited him to compose a new work. Bizet proposed Mérimée's novella as a source of the source material. The project was able to move forward, but the directors were very concerned. Carmen is an incredibly gritty story. Its depictions of sexuality and violence were unheard of to appear on stages at that time. And the Opera Comique directors really fought Bizet over what was going to be represented on stage. But Bizet stood firm in his vision, and the directors relented. And Carmen is a piece now that has been performed in so many different ways, so many different opera houses. We've had Carmen on Ice. We've had Beyonce starring in Carmen, a hip opera. Movie directors from Cecil B. DeMille to Charlie Chaplin have tried their hand at it, as well as in musical theater with the classic Carmen Jones. So it has become over time an enduring story, and every version tells it differently, but at its core, Carmen is an opera about seduction, jealousy, revenge, and fate. Its two central characters are Don Jose, a soldier from the country, and Carmen, who is a Roma woman working in a cigarette factory. Now, when Carmen is arrested for attacking another woman, she seduces Don Jose in order to escape. The pair become lovers, and Don Jose ends up leaving his fiancée and running away from the army to be with Carmen. But months later, Carmen has grown tired of him. She's turned her attention to the bullfighter, Escamillo, and Don Jose finds out about the affair. He follows her to the amphitheater where the bullfighters are about to perform, and he murders her in a jealous rage. Now, this was shocking subject matter for its day, and in the world of Bel Canto, this is shocking subject matter to Father Arguedas. He says that Carmen gives him dreams, and then instead of hearing music, he hears lust, and instead of hearing lyrics, he hears the lust of this piece. Now, Carmen also has another place in the novel which is interesting through the relationship between Gen, the interpreter, and one of the young rebels whose name is also Carmen. I'm hopeful in the chat maybe we can explore a little bit about that connection more fully. But it's notable that when Gen goes to meet Carmen in secret, the lyrics of one of the opera's arias come into his mind, and that is, "Love is a rebellious bird that no one can tame." So we're about to hear that music now, and as you watch and listen, consider how this piece might relate first to the young priest, Father Arguedas, but also to the star-crossed lovers, Gen and Carmen. Here we have Janae Bridges performing the habanera.
Je préfère
That's a wonderful Sinead Bridges, as I think you may have mentioned, Andrea, probably the Carmen on the operatic stage now. As a matter of fact, she made her Metropolitan Opera debut just about 2 months before the pandemic struck. And she was due to open a new production of Carmen this fall at the Met. Of course, that's not happening until we get this pandemic under control. But we are anxiously awaiting, once we are back in the houses, that we will see her Carmen at the Met.
Without a doubt. And I think, just going back to the story, listening to that, it's not surprising that Father Argueta says that he hears lust in that music. I think, you don't need a provocative staging to understand what's going on. I think that Bizet wrote it into those, very seductive chromatics that just kind of slink and ease throughout. It's really kind of a marvel when you think about it.
You are exactly right. It's hard to resist. Few can resist the charms of Carmen.
Absolutely. So we have 2 more pieces of music we want to share this evening. And Arthur, go ahead. Let's bring us to the next one.
All right. Very good. We learn in the novel that Hosokawa is introduced to opera by his father, and that opera then becomes his passion. And so the next opera is Rigoletto, composed Giuseppe Verdi, the most important Italian operatic composer. When he was a young man, in 1836, he was 23, he meets a woman by the name of Margherita Barezzi, who ends up becoming his wife. He has a daughter soon after, the following year, a son. But tragically, within the next 2 years, infant mortality was high, not like it is today. He ends up losing through illness his son, daughter, and then the last year, right before that, or right after that, Verdi loses his wife to encephalitis. And so here he is at 27 years of age, having lost everything. He said, "A third coffin has now left my house. The 3 most dear have vanished forever. My family is destroyed." And so soon after this, we start to see Verdi become really obsessed with the patriarchal in his operas. He's the father figure is always concerned that this outside force will come in and rob him of his treasure, his son or his daughter. And so you see in Verdi's duets with his sons and daughters this very moving and tender music in all of his duets. And so we're going to play one of those duets here for Rigoletto. Those of you who don't know Rigoletto, Rigoletto is a court jester. He's the court jester to the Duke of Mantua, a young, handsome fellow who spends most of his time seducing young women and stealing their honor. Well, this young Duke happens to masquerade as a poor student and meets this pretty girl at church, and he puts the moves on her, and he ends up dishonoring her. The Duke doesn't realize, though, that this girl he's met is the daughter of Rigoletto, the daughter of his employee. And so, of course, soon it comes out, Rigoletto now swears vengeance on his employer, the Duke of Mantua. And so in this particular case, he has basically sworn this promise to kill him. But the daughter, who is, of course, embarrassed that she's been dishonored, but she doesn't want the guy to be killed. She still has feelings for the Duke. So in this particular scene, she's begging with her father to spare the life of the Duke, and he will have none of it. And he's in his aria, or their duet, Si Vendetta, yes, vengeance. Now, I should tell you, the clip I'm going to play you, the scene actually already happened. So they've already sung Si Vendetta. Now, in opera, especially in Italy, if a particular performance of something is really loved, the audience will clamor for the singers to repeat that number. And so in the opera, the act is already closed. The curtain has fallen on the act, but the audience insists that they come back and sing the Si Vendetta one more time. So I'm just gonna play for you a recording back from the opera back in Verona, Italy. This sort of open air theater, which happens usually during the summer. They actually were able to do performances this past summer with socially, observing social distance. But here is Si Vendetta. You won't see them in character and on stage because the curtain has already fallen, but they come to the footlights to sing this Si Vendetta. So here it is, Leo Nucci, along with the soprano Invo Mula. Here she is.
Vecchio t'inganni, un indice avrai. Sì, benedetta, tremenda, benedetta, chi per fare me sarà Dio, e colonirti di gialona da fretta, e alla sara per
There we are, Leo Nucci, baritone, soprano Inva Nulla, in a performance from 2001 at the Arena di Verona in Italy.
Thank you, Arthur. So the very last piece of music that we see in Bel Canto comes from Rossini's masterpiece, The Barber of Seville. Now, Arthur referenced Rossini earlier. He's one of the great Bel Canto composers, so it seems only fitting that we would see his work referenced in the novel. Now, like so many other truly great operas, The Barber of Seville was based on a play of the same name, one of a trilogy of plays by the great French playwright Pierre Beaumarchais. Arthur can tell you how much I love to go on and on about Beaumarchais. If we had the time tonight, I might do just that. But this was an author and writer who lived an extraordinary life. He was not only a playwright, he was also a publisher, a musician, an inventor. He was a diplomat, an arms dealer. He was a spy. And in the midst of this really completely epic life, he wrote a trilogy of plays based on the character of Figaro. And if you know nothing else about opera, I'm sure you've heard of Figaro, or you've at least heard the aria in which his name provides our famous refrain. And that aria is from The Barber of Seville, which is the story of Count Almaviva wooing his beloved Rosina with the aid of the clever and cunning barber Figaro. So in great operatic fashion, the Count disguises himself as a penniless student named Lindoro, and he tries to work his way into Rosina's heart. And the very last thing that Roxanne sings in Bel Canto is Rosina's aria Una voce poco fa, or A Little While Ago, in which Rosina sings of her love for Lindoro, who of course we know is really Almaviva in disguise. And I just really love the way that this aria is used in this moment. Barber is considered one of the greatest comedies of the opera canon. So its use here in this very dramatic, very high stakes novel just seems very carefully considered to me. The choice of this aria provides a huge dramatic contrast to the action that immediately follows. This aria appears in the novel at the exact moment when all seems well in the house. The lines between captors and captives are starting to disappear. Right after Roxanne sings from Barber, everyone goes outside together to play soccer. They're existing peacefully. And more than that, everyone has started to develop real bonds. We see that members of both sides, both the guerrillas and the captives, have been playing chess together. We have Roxanne, who is teaching music to the rebel Cesar. Gen and Carmen, of course, have fallen in love. And just pages before the Barber aria appears, Vice President Iglesias makes a plan to formally adopt the young guerrilla Ismael and take him on as his son. So there's this sense that what started as a horrific act of terrorism has yielded a family. And you have this beautiful, hopeful, loving music from Barber underscoring all of this right before the military descends. And everything in this world is turned into chaos. So you have this great setup from Ann Patchett to turn this entire world on its head and really add to the dramatic tension and the arc. But there's also a smaller and more character-driven connection to this piece, and I find it really delightful. So at this point in the novel, as I mentioned, Roxanne is giving voice lessons to Cesar, one of the young rebels, and we learn that she has fallen in love with his singing. The text says that every night Mr. Hosokawa came to her bedroom, and every morning Cesar waited to practice. If there was something else to want, she forgot what that might be. The text also tells us that Cesar's was a voice that amazed her, and that he was meant to be the greatest singer of his time. So she sings Una voce poco fa right after Cesar has sung for everyone in the house. He kind of makes his debut there for the audience that has gathered. And the crowd calls for her to give an encore to his performance. And her response is to sing a song of love, which starts with the lines, "The voice I heard just now has thrilled my very heart." So whether you think Roxanne is singing for Cesar or for Mr. Hosokawa, with whom she's truly fallen in love, or whether you think it's just a great dramatic contrast, there's no doubt that this is a thrilling and beloved piece of music and just perfectly placed within the story of Bel Canto. So I want to hear that now. And the performance we're about to see comes from 1962, sung by the great Roberta Peters. So let's hear that now, Arthur.
That ending always gets me. I love that.
I love it. You have that perfect example of Bel Canto style. Couldn't be demonstrated any more perfectly. And again, so fitting to conclude the music that we hear or see in the novel Bel Canto. So that brings us to the end of our presentation tonight. Again, I want to thank everyone for joining us. I know Mary is about to take over and lead the discussion. Again, if you have questions, please go ahead and put those in the chat. Before we leave this evening, just as an aside, I am going to put the link to a survey in the chat so you all can give us some feedback on how this evening went for you, things that we might be able to do better next time. It only takes 2 minutes to take that survey. So before we exit today, I'll make sure you have that link. But for now, Mary, I think it's all you.
Thank you very much. Wow, was this informative? I just got to say, you guys have such a great rapport too. I mean, you're engaging. You're passionate about it. What a great presentation. Thank you. And I think everybody in the chat seems to agree. I see a question here. Is the Opera Theater planning to produce any of the operas that you described in the coming seasons? If either of you want to take that question, feel free.
Yeah, right now, with the pandemic, scheduling opera, especially in the house, is still very tentative. But I think we will have some announcements about what we're going to be doing in the coming months very soon. So I don't have anything to report as of yet, but there will be some things coming down very soon. So
Awesome.
stay tuned.
Yes. Now, if anybody else has questions, please type them in the chat. I will read them out. If you need to leave too, don't feel funny. We understand. But I have a question about, do either of you, Andrea or Arthur, have any recommendations for somebody who's totally new to opera? What would you say to start with? Something accessible.
Do you want to go, Andrea? Or?
Yeah, I mean, I think that Arthur and I can both answer that, and we may have similar answers in some respects and different answers in other ways. I really recommend beginning with La Boheme. I say that probably a little bit kind of selfishly because it was the first opera I fell in love with. But it has just gorgeous music by Puccini, the most beautiful music that you could ever imagine. A lovely story. I mean, of course, romance, love story, but also the story of friends, the story of this friend group in Paris. If anyone is a musical theater fan, the musical Rent was based on or inspired by La Boheme, so you would be able to kind of follow the story and see the characters there. So I always recommend that folks start with a piece like La Boheme.
I was going to say, I totally agree. I usually start with two pieces, depending on who the person is. If they want a beautiful love story, I say La Boheme. If they want some blood and guts, I usually give them Tosca, another Puccini opera, which by the end of the opera, all the main characters are dead. So if you want something a bit more adventurous that way, I say Tosca. And it's not long either. It's one of the shortest operas. So you get in and it gets done very quickly. So Boheme or Tosca, I would say would be two good pieces to start with.
Excellent. We had another question. Are you doing more presentations like this? Are there any upcoming ones we should know about?
Yeah, I would say, check back with MOT's social media, sign up for our mailing list for our Bravissimo email. We will be giving this presentation again a couple of times before the year is over if you just want to hear about Bel Canto again. But Arthur and I are very lucky that we get to talk about opera in a lot of different ways with a lot of different groups. So we have done Opera 101 presentations, opera and film presentations. We've talked about, opera in Detroit as MOT approaches our 50th anniversary season. So I would definitely recommend to follow us on social media, sign up for our mailing list, and definitely come and see us. We're around.
Yeah, and if any of the members might have any groups you think might benefit or might enjoy this or appreciate this, please let us know. We are happy. We spend most of our time going around partnering with organizations, DIA, just so many all around the city and the surrounding metropolitan area.
Definitely.
That's great.
And our email addresses are on our website. Again, I'm the Director of Education. Arthur is the Director of External Affairs. And just feel free to drop us a line anytime. We would love to hear from you.
Thank you. Did you put the link in yet for the poll? Or for
I'll go ahead and do that right now. So
okay.
If there's another question, feel free.
Yep, if anybody has, I have another question. Any other music related books to recommend?
As far as novels, Andrea, I don't know, novels maybe?
Yeah, I mean, I think, so one of actually the best things that I've ever read about opera, and I don't know how folks, feel in this group, is actually a graphic novel that's directed toward, early high school age. There was a graphic novel that came out a couple years ago called Operatic. And it's the story of a young girl who takes a music appreciation course and discovers opera and finds that opera is just integral to who she is. She connects with it so deeply. And so it's the story of this young girl, kind of learning a little bit about how she fits into the world and how she fits in with her friends, and discovering this deep love of opera. And it's really just an incredibly, exceptionally beautiful graphic novel and coming of age story. So I certainly recommend that. Although there's no end of wonderful, composer bios to read. And, Ann Patchett would certainly recommend Fred Plotkin's Opera 101, which got her into opera. Again, she calls it the book that changed my life. So how about you, Arthur?
I would just go with that, but I wanted to make one comment. I saw someone put something in the chat. They're talking about they had seen, I believe it was Pavarotti, they said, back in the days when the Metropolitan Opera used to do tours, and they would tour around the United States, and they'd come through Detroit for like a week or so and just do a massive amount of performances. Of course, Dr. David D. Chiara, who was our founder and visionary, in some ways did his part to unfortunately end that, or fortunately, however you want to see it. He brought opera full time. So instead of us waiting to have our opera once a year for a week, he started our company, of course, Michigan Opera Theater, so we could have opera all year round. And so, yes, I've heard many great accounts of the old Met coming through Detroit, but we are just so fortunate that we have our own permanent company all year round, Michigan Opera Theater.
Yeah, very
Definitely.
lucky. Yes.
Yeah. And I would also encourage folks to read, the source material that operas are based on. Just this last year, MOT performed a season where every single opera was inspired by a literary work. So we started with Eugene Onegin, which was composed by Tchaikovsky based on a work by Pushkin. We concluded that season with the operatic adaptation of The Grapes of Wrath, of course, inspired by the Steinbeck novel. So there's kind of no end to, pieces that you can read that are connected to opera in some way or inspired by opera in some way.
Excellent. So I don't see, I see someone, I believe the MOT offers discounts to library holders through that Suburban Library Cooperative. So that's an option once we start. Once we can start purchasing performance tickets again, keep an eye on that. Yes.
Yes, yeah, definitely do. We've been very, very happy to partner with the library collectives. And so once the world opens up again, definitely, check on your libraries, check on the collectives and see what possibilities there are.
Yeah. And please also look for us on Facebook, Instagram, look for us. We you can keep up on what's going on. There's always things happening every month.
Excellent. Any more questions? We got a couple minutes. If anybody has any question, pop it in the chat. And if not, I'll just ask one quick general question. What did people think of the end, the epilogue, where I'm going to do a spoiler, so if you don't want to hear this, turn your sound off, where Jen and our leading lady get together. Survey is in there. Survey, for anyone who's requesting it, the survey is in the chat section. So if you click the three dots on your computer under more, you should see the chat. So at the bottom of your screen on Zoom, hover around there, you'll see three dots, more, click that, click the chat, and then you'll see the link for the survey. But if anybody wants to contribute in the chat what they thought of Jen and our leading lady, that came as a surprise to me. I was glad to see it, kind of made me feel better about everything, but wow.
Yeah.
I guess it kind of makes sense, right?
Yes, it does.
Because he's sort of the voice, even of Hosokawa. She's the voice. His voice is probably the voice she knows best because he's the one who's actually doing all the communicating.
Yes,
so.
He's the translator. He's been speaking for everybody.
Exactly.
Yeah, and he definitely had to already profess love for her from other people, so he was probably ready to do it. He had a lot of suggestions. I see one more question. Who was on the double bill with Skiki at Macomb?
So yeah, that's a great question. So right before we shut down, the last full opera that we were able to produce was Gianni Skiki. So some of you may have seen that opera at the Macomb Center for the Performing Arts. And interestingly, there's a composer named Michael Ching who wrote a sequel to Gianni Skiki about 80 years after the original. He decided to create a sequel to it. So that double bill was Gianni Skiki and Michael Ching's Buoso's Ghost, which is about what happens next after Gianni Skiki tricks everybody. Ranuccio and Lauretta are supposed to walk off into the sunset and get married, but in Michael Ching's version, there's more hijinks afoot. So we were able to present.
I was going to say, Skiki is now being framed for Buoso's murder. And so that's what that opera kind of solves. Who murdered Buoso, if that in fact was happening? So it's very funny. I was going to mention, I'm not sure if you guys noticed when the Skiki slide was up, that opera premiered at the Met during the pandemic of 1918. So it's just very odd that would be our last production on the stage, and then we would be hit with this pandemic. It's just a little scary. The parallels.
Yeah, definitely. I see that Christina wrote in the chat, and I really love this. She said she fell in love with Gen when she read the book, so she was a little lukewarm about the ending, but she said maybe opera makes people fall in love. And I think that's really lovely.
The passion and the, yes.
Yeah, thank you for that, Christina.
That's beautiful. I'm going to give, if anybody wants to unmute yourself, we can wish sing a nice goodbye to our friends. So if you want to unmute yourself, you just click the little microphone in the left-hand corner of your screen.
Thank you, Arthur. Thank you, Andrea. Love you.
Brava, brava,
Thank you. Good
brava.
night.
Bravo, bravo. Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank
everybody.
you.
This was so wonderful.
Wonderful.
Thank you for spending your evening with us.
Thank you.
Thank
And
you.
don't forget to do the survey if you haven't had an opportunity. I'll keep it up for a little longer in case you haven't gotten the chat.
I just
Thank
keep
you.
putting it in.
It was wonderful.
Such a lovely presentation.
Thank
so
you.
much.
You.
Thank you.
Okay, you think we got a chance for everybody to get the survey?
I think so.
Yeah.
Okay.
Hopefully everyone has clicked on it who will do it. I hope folks
Yes.
will let us know their thoughts. That always helps us.
Oh,
Yes.
definitely. We always want to get better and better and better.
Absolutely.
I
And
am
it allows us
speechless.
to
but
share, allows us
will,
to share. with our community.
Thank you. What a good job. All right. Good night, everybody. And
Thank you.
happy Tuesday.
Thank
Okay.
you, Mary. Really appreciate you setting this up. Thank you so
Thank
much.
you. Thank you. Wow. Goodbye, Arthur. Goodbye, Ann.
Bye. Thanks again.
Bye, everyone.